Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Iceland. We have here representatives from Iceland and the United States. We will try to discuss and explore the benefits and potential risks involved in implementing psychedelic substances or medicine in society, and how it is best to revise our current legal and social frameworks. You're experts in the field, so I will let you do the talking. But to begin with, I would really much like to hear Victor's story, just to give us a glimpse of why you have been following policy making and implementing this change that hopefully can reduce the suffering of people around us here.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I got into this, well, my story is that I'm from the United States. I was born in Puerto Rico, which is right now a territory of the United States, and so I'm a United States citizen. But the way that I was born there was that my mother was an immigrant from Dominican Republic, and so she immigrated there, and she lived in poverty in Dominican Republic, and so her and my father didn't have an opportunity to get an education, and gave me that opportunity by bringing me to the United States and having me there. And so what I found was, over my lifetime and in the environment that I grew up in, was dealing with intergenerational trauma and also dealing with what was happening in my community and systemically in the United States. And eventually that led to me, in 2010, I was 300 pounds. I had been kicked out of college at the time, and I also lost my apartment. I was evicted. And that put me on a path to healing. And when I was working in the mental health system in my community and also seeking services myself, and eventually decided that I was going to try psilocybin in 2016, and it completely shifted the work that I wanted to do for my community. And so I went from having personal experience, working in my community. I then spent about 3 years with the governor of Pennsylvania at the policy level, working on trauma-informed care, psychedelics at the federal and state level. And so I did all of that because in my own story, I realized that that's what I needed, advocacy, throughout my entire life, and what could have been prevented in my community and for myself if those changes would have taken place. But also in my work, understanding at every level that there was something bigger that needed to happen. And so as I navigated my own experience, my experience in my community, working with people of color in my community, working in the governor's office and dealing with swimming in the syrup, as someone said yesterday, right? I realized there needs to be, what's the connection between all of these levels, and how do we need to be working to ensure that we're taking into consideration all these different perspectives and to move things forward. And so that's what I've been trying to do in the policy space, is really being on the ground in my community, engaging at the state level, engaging at the federal level, and really trying to connect all of the different paradigms and find where the convergence is to move things forward.
Thank you. So, Starko, why is a police officer and a therapist using MDMA in therapy for police officers? Can you tell us about your work and a little bit about your also personal attachment to this?
Sure. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate the interest, and thank you for having me here. There was a lot of different moving pieces that had to fall in place for me to be here, and it means a lot. So I am first generation Armenian American, and descendant of people who are survivors of genocide. And I found myself in Massachusetts because my parents were able to get to the States where we found safety. Very early on, I realized that I wanted to get as close to human suffering as possible to help. And what better way to do that than to become a police officer? Now, I had that thought, but I didn't know why. And I brought up my lineage story with you because I think it's a really important part of the story. I realized the impact of transgenerational trauma and how my entire life was unfolding through that trauma when I was able to experience MDMA. And I was able to have access to MDMA because it was a federally sanctioned research protocol. As a working officer, it's very, very difficult to have access to these healing modalities without jeopardizing your career. So I'm very grateful for that. And what I realized is, we as police officers, we have a uniting mission, protecting and serving. And we have to work to try to find people who are struggling and do just that, protect and serve them. And for me, that meant keeping them out of cages, preventing arrest, and keeping them out of caskets, coffins, preventing death. And in my community, I was allowed to do that. MDMA allowed me to know why I was inclined to step in between warring parties and put myself at risk to stop them from killing each other. So that's how I found myself here with you. And thank you.
Thank you. Just to carry a little bit on further, on your thoughts of decriminalization of the drug or the use of psychedelics and the implementation of for society to use it as a medicine.
Yeah, so my take on decriminalization is that it can't happen soon enough. It's a very important incremental step in the appropriate direction. And society has a lot of concerns related to this. That's why we're up here having this discussion. And we love our society. It makes these types of conferences possible. So you don't want to light anything on fire. We don't need to scare people. We don't need to alienate people. We need to pull them to the table. We need to have conversations. We need to make them feel comfortable enough to take the next step forward. And that can only happen if we meet eye to eye, heart to heart, and have a conversation. So decriminalization is a very well thought out, the language around it is beautiful, incremental step in the right direction.
Thank you. So we are probably witnessing a paradigm shift concerning these substances. But Victor, what are your thoughts on the societal implications of legalizing those drugs or substances?
Yeah, I think on the subject of decriminalization, when I'm thinking from the perspective of the war on drugs in the United States and the way that that's really decimated communities of color and continues to impact us on a disproportionate level. Mm-hmm. Even with marijuana being what it is now in terms of legalization and medicalization, you still see communities of color getting prosecuted for marijuana. And so when I think about decriminalization, I think it's a very important step towards social justice. Yeah. And also, it's important to ask, when we talk, I believe in the benefits of a medicalized model, but I also think that we need to ask the question: who's being left out of this conversation, mm-hmm. and who is going to be impacted once you corner the medicines into a certain, framework? Yeah. And, people outside of that don't have access to it. So I tell people, if I'm in the United States, for example, If I have insurance and I'm privileged, then I can go and I can pay $2,500 to have a psilocybin session. But my neighbor next door can't afford that, and he sees the benefits that it's bringing my life, and he can grow mushrooms for $40 in his house. He's gonna grow mushrooms for $40 in his house, right? So I think when we talk about decriminalization, there's fear of like what's gonna happen, are people gonna be safe? But the reality is, are people gonna be safe when these medicines are in public consciousness all over the world and people don't have access to them, and then there's no infrastructure to support them, to use them outside of the medicalized model? So I think it's very imperative that we're having a parallel process here with regard to how we're approaching these medicines.
Yeah, thank you. So we are facing attitudes and thoughts in whether it's good for society or does it have some risks. Haraldur, if you could tell me concerning just the destigmatization of psychedelics, is legalization enough to go ahead in implementing it here in Iceland?
Well, I think we need to start with a bit of discussion about hypocrisy. The war on drugs is more or less just ridiculous. It has no impact on use. It has no impact on accessibility. As we've heard, it causes a lot of social problems. So in fact, I agree with Sarko, it's never soon enough. Yeah. Because it has created more problems than it has solved. In fact, it's not solved any problems. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to as soon as possible to move those restrictions. We're not going to, even though in this Congress we're primarily about discussing psychedelics in professional treatment of clients. We know that the mental health problems are very big, and the mental health services are hardly scratching the surface. Mm-hmm. So even though it's certainly welcome that professionals will now start to have access to psychedelics as treatment, my background is in kind of complex severe trauma, where I worked in England and now 10 years here. And we know that and this is one of the kind of paradoxes of PTSD, is that we talk about PTSD caused by trauma, but there is another argument saying that, yes, it has got something to do with trauma, but primarily to do with inability to process difficult emotions. And that's where the psychedelic comes in as a kind of intelligence booster for the ability to transform severe emotions. So for me, I think it's very important as soon as possible to take those steps, to certainly decriminalize, to stop the ongoing harm these laws are making for society. I think that's very, very important. Now the dilemma, as you kind of hinted at, remains between the kind of professional and lay use of these medications. Just to repeat again, we're talking about the therapeutics of psychedelics. We're not talking about drugs and substance of abuse, even though the war on them is obviously part of that, and which is not helpful. But the mushrooms, like we can pick in the autumn in Iceland, they are easily accessible. And we know that already for the last 5 years, if not longer, there is a strong underground service for people with mental health services. This has been on the radio, this has been on the TV. We've heard some kind of dramatic, remarkable progress people have made with severe, long-standing difficulties that they have not got help with or solved within the mental health services. So I think we need to be realistic that we need to think about these two domains, the professional domain and the lay domain, and how we need to move into both of these areas and ensure that there is a certain framework on both levels to ensure as good possible treatment as possible. In Iceland, we have a society, Félag Græðra, of alternative treatments, and I think that's a good area where potential lay therapists could be registered to ensure that there's some moral conduct, there's some rules of engagement, there's some basic learning, etc. So I think we need to think of a legal framework both for the medical profession and the lay framework.
We need to assure the accessibility of all groups in society.
Exactly, because
That's the key.
The lay group is probably 95%.
Yeah.
And the professional group, which I think is important, but it should really focus on the most unwell. Yeah. Because we know that things can go wrong with psychedelics, and certainly the individuals with the biggest traumatic history and biggest cognitive difficulties, for example, people with Asperger, autistic spectrum, severe ADHD, this is a group which is really challenged in dealing with difficult emotions. And these are the ones that we should look at in the medical profession to assist in the processing of their challenges.
And also concerning shame, like Eric talked about yesterday.
Yeah,
that's
war on
the
drugs
group.
has caused a lot of shame.
Yes.
Yes.
And the moral justification to seek treatment has to be something that the government and society helps people to access and get some help.
Yeah. I think that even though just like heroin and cannabis or mushrooms, there was a program made a couple of years back and showed that it takes less than 15 minutes to order any of these meds in Iceland on the black market, and it's even quicker than ordering a pizza.
Yeah.
So we know there isn't an issue of accessibility, but there is more an issue of dealing with the shame and dealing with kind of safe frameworks for their use.
And also the therapeutic necessity of getting people to really recover from things.
And now in the aftermath of COVID, where we've seen potentially 30% increase for mental health services, this is really a crisis in mental health. This is something that is of great importance.
Thank you. I'd just like to build on something that you said with those numbers, the 5% professional and the 95% lay. If Iceland is able to create a robust self-care pathway that allows all the different groups access, that brings in social justice, that brings in decriminalization, that brings in access to your first responders who can't get a diagnostic label. In the States, we'll lose our badge. We won't be able to go to work until we get a full medical screening done again, right? So there's a lot of fear around these labels, and we spent a lot of time yesterday, today, talking about how rigid those labels are, right? So how do we afford access to people in the self-care stage of the game to these substances that are so healing, take away the stigma, and ensure that everybody has access, right? So the medicalization is absolutely important, but to have access to the medical pathway, you're going to need a distinct diagnostic label. So you're going to lose your first responders, your police, right? Your corrections, I don't know exactly what you call them here, right? The different groups, firefighters, medical, paramedical professionals, they need access before they get a diagnostic label, before it gets that bad.
On that, has it been easy for you to offer MDMA psychotherapy for your fellow officers?
Also, I can't offer that yet in the States.
Yeah.
I can suggest psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. Ketamine is available, and I do hold space for people in a medical context with ketamine. I've been invited to clinics to sit with first responders and retired first responders. But the other medicines are basically in the pipeline for the medical access. But we don't want to lose groups. We don't want to, we need to keep social justice front and center, and we want to be able to afford healing modalities to people while they're still well, before they get so bad that they're going to lose their job or put their gun in their mouth and blow their head off, right? Because that's what happens in the States.
So have you been seeing increase in suicide in the force?
Yes.
Yes.
Increase in depression.
Yes.
Anxiety, suicidality, stress. There's a running, not so funny joke amongst law enforcement in the States is, which marriage are you on? 5, 6, 7? Right? All the impacts of trauma related to the work. On average, a police officer experiences 200 plus critical incidents in their career. 200 plus critical incidents in their career, and they can't talk about becoming unraveled by those incidents, because if they get a diagnostic label, they're out. So think about self-care and access and social justice and lay access.
So it's not about only stigmatized psychedelics, it's also stigmatized mental health.
That's right.
If I can put in a note on that, and that's, I think Ben came to this wonderfully in the first talk in the conference yesterday, that it is well known in psychiatry that all these diagnostic labels, even though we liked it's this specific problem or that specific problem, if you look at inheritability, they don't really stand up to scrutiny, that all the mental health kind of groups, they are inherited together as a general impact. And we talk a lot about trauma, and maybe that's an overused word. I think it is the very nature of the human condition to have challenges. And I think that's a much better word. Depending on the challenge, like we heard from Will today, that the early challenges in childhood and teenage years, they caused a shutdown, a dissociation, a distancing of your own nature. And this is all part of growing up. We all do it. But the process of healing is regaining yourself. And even though within the medical profession, we love these diagnostic labels, but I think the psychedelics, they level the fields. This is just that you've been challenged, you're not coping with the challenge, and the psychedelics can help you to accept the challenge and start a healing process. This is extremely simple.
Ólafur, it's a stressful job, whether it's in Iceland or in the States, to be a police officer. We are seeing in the news increase in violence in Iceland, so the stress is probably much more than it was like 10 years ago or so. Can you tell us how you are coping with this in your training?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, obviously it's quite a different reality towards what's happening in the United States, and the police is largely unarmed in Iceland. We have a totally different society here, and actually the most stress is not operational stress, it's administrative stress, it's bureaucracy, sorry to say it. So, I mean, totally different things. And the approach as well. The approach, there's been for many years, in 2007, we implement a peer support system. We have psychological services available that are free for all police officers. We don't ask about the diagnostics. If you don't feel well, we don't care. We want to support you. We don't need DSM labels on anything, and it's confidential. We don't have fitness for duty evaluations when you come back. It's a totally different culture that we have. We have mental preparation training, psychoeducation. We've introduced heart rate variability, biofeedback in training scenarios, in trying to prepare officers to keep calm, to be able to collaborate with the community. In Iceland, police officers are the community, and the community is the police officers. That's how we view our police service. It's not a police force or law enforcement. That's how we would like to keep it. That's what we train. That's how we try to look at not only the rules, but also the attitudes and values of police officers that are a part of this community. Are we successful all the time? No, probably not. Is there trauma within police officers in Iceland? Yes, unfortunately there is. But we are very much aware of this big gap, as Haraldur was talking about, between the challenges that have been facing with police officers is the lack of resources for people with severe mental illness that police officers feel helpless with. They don't have any resources. And here, spending the last couple of days, I really, I have a bit of hope that perhaps we can find more effective treatments.
On the notion of just carrying a weapon, that must be stressful. And are there any research, or if you could, just elaborate on that, just going into work carrying a weapon, because we are, as a society, talking about maybe implementing taser guns here in Iceland. I think it would be really something if we have lessons learned from the US and what you are doing in Massachusetts concerning that.
Sure, I can speak to that. And it's not a simple answer, right? You're going to end up having officers say that if I didn't have a firearm on my waist, I wouldn't do the job. Right? And then you're going to have officers that are going to say the firearm on my waist adds additional weight, additional burden to the job, and everywhere in between, right? Constitutionally, the way our society is structured is very different. And I think there's a statistic out there that we have more weapons in the country than people. Okay, that's a powerful point to make. So policing plays out a little differently. It's also a constitutionally protected right for individuals in our country to have access to firearms and weaponry. Very different. So I think that's the answer.
Yes.
Coming from our perspective, I wouldn't be able to speak to all of law enforcement, but I would put it on a spectrum in that you're going to get very different answers from different police officers. Yeah.
Have you any thoughts? Can you elaborate on this? Would it be more stressful for, would it be bad, in your thoughts, as a police officer, to have some protection with the taser, or is it a more stressful thing to add to the job?
A taser or a firearm? Or
no, a taser.
A taser?
Yeah, here. Yeah.
I think that the research that we've been doing within the police and the attitudes towards increased use of force options is that police officers in Iceland do not want to carry firearms in general. But the taser is, of course, something that police officers now feel that would make them feel at least safer in the job, and that is with regards to knives, as you were talking about the increased violence. So that's more towards knife violence. That has been have been more incidents recorded. And that we've seen that in the UK and the neighboring countries, and there have been big trials. But I think both in Norway and Sweden. But I think that it also increases their stress, which means that we have to increase the training in scenario training and help the police officers. And that's why we are trying to help them reduce their stress in the situation, to make them be able to take better decisions, reduce tunnel vision, and all that. So that's what we try.
There's an interesting point I'd just like to make. It sounds like in Iceland you're considering implementing less than lethal options. We start with most lethal. We already have access to most lethal, and we explore bringing in more less than lethal options. Right? So it's really interesting. The starting points are different, but what are we all talking about? We can't put our heads in the sand about violence, there is a dark side to the human creature. And sometimes on the street, that dark side comes up. And we have to manage that situation correctly. More training, role-playing, mental health first aid, CIT training, CISM, right? Defuse, debriefing, all of that goes into it. But in the States, we start with the most lethal, and we're bringing in less than lethal because we're taking mental health conditions very seriously. And people shouldn't die on the street. And if we have taser, they can be stopped without lethal injury, right?
Yeah. So, Victor, your thoughts on this big change?
Around the tasers?
Yeah, no. So the process in the US, the current, it looks like that it will be FDA approved, the use of psychedelics in clinical settings like MDMA. Can you tell us about the situation? When will it be legalized and accessible?
So, Rick is probably the best person to ask when it's going to be legalized. But what I've heard is by 2024. So, in the States, we have a variety of different approaches to this work with regard to psychedelics. You have decriminalization in some states. So, you have decriminalization, supported adult use, so states like Oregon and Colorado have implemented or passed ballot measures that now decriminalize most drugs or a certain amount or certain psychedelic substances, and then also establish a supported services model for adults that does not require you to be a mental health clinician. It's a state licensure that you get in order to be able to deliver those services. Then you have clinical research, so the work that Compass is doing, the work that MAPS is doing to get approvals for psilocybin and MDMA. You have the medical use of psychedelics, which will come after the clinical research, and then you have policy analysis. So you have some states that are passing laws to explore what the benefits are. In terms of what happens once, so generally, and I was guilty of this before I was really involved in the psychedelic space, everyone's ready to, like, you know, it gets approved on January 1st, 2024, and like tomorrow I'm gonna go and start giving my clients MDMA. But the reality is that on the regulatory side, and there's a lot of steps still to take, so there's things like standards of training, and standards of training, standards of care, standards of training and education, et cetera, that need to happen broadly for the psychedelic space to continue to move forward. Having insurance in the United States specifically cover it, because we don't have the same healthcare system as other countries where it's a public service, right, that they can get or that they should get. And then there's also there's a lot of like regulatory hurdles still. So even when MDMA is approved, there are, I think now 27 or 28 states that have to reschedule MDMA at the state level for it to be able to be a legal medicine within their state. So it's exciting and it's going to move forward, but that's just to say that there's still a lot of work to do, and there's also a lot of different approaches that are moving forward in the United States beyond just the medicalization model. You know, you have, like I said, Oregon, Colorado. There's localities like Washington, D.C. that decriminalize psilocybin. California is getting ready to decriminalize this year, coming up, hopefully. So they're exploring we're exploring a lot of different paradigms when it comes to these medicines, and I think that's necessary for where this, to be able to be as inclusive as possible in the field.
So in January 2024, can Icelandic psychiatrists administer MDMA when it has the FDA approval?
No. There are many hurdles here as well. I think that the next hurdle is that now that both psilocybin and MDMA are in phase 3 studies, then in principle, doctors in Iceland should have access to these medications for treatment, for compassionate treatment for those who are not responding to traditional treatments. And in my profession, as we heard today, there's a very large proportion who don't respond to treatment. So we're talking about massive numbers. So we are at the moment waiting for a recommendation from the medical general, Landlækni, about who should potentially be allowed to have treatment. And then we'll have to go through our FDA, Lyfjastofnun, to apply for permission to prescribe and treat these clients. I think these steps potentially could be taken this year. So potentially before the end of year, we will be starting treatments with psychedelics. There's also the issue of education and training and supervision, and etc. But I think we already have a formed team to take on the challenge. So it's in the pipeline.
So what needs to be done to make everything go faster, because people are suffering?
Well, I think it's important, as we heard from the States, that these, especially these two medications we've been discussing, psilocybin and MDMA, that they are decriminalized.
Yeah.
And at the moment, that's being discussed in the ministries, whether that's an appropriate step. And we hopefully we will see this year or next year. So I think we can still prescribe it, even though there are illegal substances within the medical profession. But I think it's important to take those steps, take away the shame and all the kind of implication that the law on these drugs has on people.
Yeah.
And I just want to add to the conversation around decriminalization. Generally, I think what we're talking about is harm reduction, right? Like, how do we reduce harm to people, to society? As these medications, plant medicines, et cetera, become legal, you're going to have more underground use. And so the way to have the least harm to our societies and our public health systems, et cetera, is to decriminalize and then build infrastructure to support people so that they can have safe use. People are going to use drugs and plant medicines, and harm reduction accepts the fact that people have autonomy over their bodies, that they're going to use drugs whether they're legal or illegal. And so what can we do to make that a safe choice, a safer choice? And put, what can we do to do that? And so I think when we take that approach to these issues, it makes sense, right? Because as these medicines become more popular, become legalized, et cetera, people are going to want to access them. And if you're, only giving access to them in certain spaces, you're going to create more societal issues around those substances.
Yeah. A little bit on harm reduction. I think one of our Icelandic psychologists, Lilja Sif, has been exemplary in the way that she has started courses on people who want to try psychedelics. So advise them how to prepare, how to process, and that's really been going on, it's been advertised. So I think that's an exemplary first step to kind of, reduce the potential harm. Even though we know that these meds are relatively safe, etc., we do also know that they can cause problems, like with psychotic individuals, severe trauma, and people who are not willing or unable to face the emotions that rise up in these sessions. So,
may I?
Yes.
Those people will need additional support services when and if that happens, right? Yeah, so the infrastructure needs to be there to catch them. Yeah. But on the harm reduction side of things, I just want you all to envision, a young female, male in your family line, right? A brother, a sister, a daughter, a son, or something, right? Looking to have an enjoyable night with a substance, right? We're allowing those people to turn to gangsters for the substance. But you and I, when we want to go get a drink, we don't have to worry about that drink making us blind or destroying our liver. It's dosed out for us at a bar with somebody who's handing us the drink that we can be confident in what it is, the amount that it is, where it comes from, right? So are we making a choice about who we're protecting and who we're not protecting? This is really important concept in harm reduction. People and life first. You can't go wrong if you do people and life first.
So looking at the watch.
Yeah, really quickly,
Yes.
I wanted to add a point, and I think, so I am supportive of protecting folks that are more vulnerable with these medicines, but folks with severe mental health issues or all of the other issues that are screened out, right, for several reasons, they're still going to use drugs, right, whether they're decriminalized or not. So I don't think that that's, for me, on a policy level, I don't think that that's necessarily an argument that can hold up, because those folks are going to use the substances, whether they're decriminalized or not, and now, because they're criminalized, they can't seek the support that they need from the systems that are available. So that I just wanted to share that point.
Thank you. Thank you. So we will take some questions now from the audience. So there's one hand up there raised.
Hi, thank you. This is a very interesting and important conversation that I just wanted to partake in. My name is Halldór. I'm a member of parliament in this country. I'm in the opposition, so I don't have very much power. But I just want to say that one of my main platforms for the past few years has been fighting for decriminalization of drugs. It's incredibly important to me, and I feel very frustrated after years of that battle. I've also been fighting for medical marijuana. I gave up on that after kind of fighting for that for a while and feeling like the reaction from Parliament and society was a little bit like I was proposing we start eating children or something. It was not very well taken in, so I tried to strip it down to, hey, let's allow people to take CBD oil, which doesn't even get you high, and that's still not through, you know. So just to give you a little bit of perspective on how difficult this is, I feel sometimes I lose a little bit of hope. This conference gives me great hope. I'm so happy with this conference. I've cried today and laughed, and it's been wonderful. Thank you. My question to you, maybe, as a policymaker, fighting, because it is a little bit of prejudice, you know, it's a lack of information, prejudice, but also I think when it comes to psychedelics specifically, I really believe that the push has to come from the medical, from the health care experts. They have to push it because the knowledge isn't with the parliamentarians, which is why this is important. So my question to you, maybe, what would your advice be to us policymakers on the way forward? And also just, if anyone in here has any ideas of how we can help this move forward in Parliament, I'm here, I'm open, I'm listening. I would love to hear some ideas because I'm really, really interested. Thank you.
Hello. Hi,
So,
again, my name is Thor. I have a question.
Yeah.
What I'm...
1 minute. Sorry. Can you answer on this large question in the beginning?
Me?
Haraldur?
Conversation, bring people into the same room, the medical, the law enforcement, and the politicians, and break bread and have conversations.
So police can actually help with the government agencies and healthcare specialists. And
I think from my point of view, this is an issue of common sense.
yeah.
know the war on drugs is lost. We know that the criminalization of drugs is causing harm. It's not causing any benefit. Why do we continue with it? It's a paradox. And now that we know that these particular psychedelics are in fact very helpful, it is paradoxical that it should be banned.
Yeah. So one more question.
I want to ask the law enforcement because the classification of psychedelics, now that the science here has shown us that psychedelics are not addictive, they're on a serotonin pathway, not a dopamine pathway. So the classification of psychedelics is wrong. It's not built on science. It's breaking our human rights that we are not gaining access to these medications. So you as law enforcement, and especially you from Iceland, how do you feel about the classification of these substances that are helping and that you are partaking in restricting access to these medications, knowing that it's a human right violation to inhibit access to these? And how do you feel about arresting people that have been taking these medications?
We have the question, so I think it's not maybe for him to answer, but a lot of...
I'm asking for an opinion, not science.
Yeah, about the classification of medicine, or I mean, I think that Halldóra previously said here as well that this is more to do with you know, you have the law and the parliament that decides on that, and then you have the medical professions, and we've heard that hopefully in 18 months or so we'll get some of the clinical trials in, and hopefully, fingers crossed, that they are positive, and that will influence the rest.
But would you agree with me that it's ethically right to help people?
Excuse me, we need to have more people asking, giving more people chance, because we are really stressful in time.
If I can add just one point, that is obviously has to do with the legislators, that when the laws on these substances are forbidden, there is no attempt in the law to define what these medications are. They just list. So, for example, the psychedelics, as Thor has just suggested, they are neither addictive or harmful. But that definition isn't in the law. So, therefore, they linger on. So, it's a kind of a strange law that doesn't define the list that they're kind of bringing on.
May I say something real quick? Sir, I'm with you on Schedule 1. Schedule 1 is set up, and there isn't any science behind it. Everything listed on Schedule 1 says no known medical use, highly addictive. Once you take a look at that and look at the science that's already available, you know that that entire category is arbitrary. So something needs to happen, but it's complicated how you get that thing to happen, because there is a lot of interests intersecting. So we have to talk to one another. We need more conferences like this. And we need politicians, legislators to show up, and we need to back each other up. That's it.
Góðan daginn. I want to talk about neurological disorders. They are severely debilitating, and people in general subconsciously self-medicate without knowing they are self-medicating. These people are financially extorted, their children separated from their parents, they are imprisoned, raped, preyed upon, isolated from society, abused, belittled, and made spectacle systematically by authorities funded with taxpayer money. In 2019, on the 9th of April, authorities walked into a home, invaded the house of a woman that was in psychosis, quote unquote, and they murdered her in her home. And these officers are still working in the police force. and there has been zero action made against these individuals that murdered that woman in her house before COVID. You know what I'm saying?
Okay. Can we talk about the education?
And my question was, what are we going to do to, stop the crimes against humanity being committed right now by, the state? You know what I'm saying?
Maybe.
Who's that for? Me?
Can we talk about the education, the importance of education in society concerning people in these desperate situations?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I have a comment to make about that. The laws dictate how we interact with one another on the street. If we want those interactions to be less violent, we have to take a look at the laws that are permitting those situations to reach the level of violence with that type of tragedy. It's extremely unfortunate, and I'm deeply saddened to hear that story. And that does happen in a lot of places. So let's review the laws. Let's really deeply think about what's allowing interactions to go in that direction, and mindfully adjust so that we can reduce violence from taking place on the streets.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add on that, so it's just to have that dialogue and to learn from each case. I of course don't know the cases, but I think it's very important for each and every case to be an example of how we can do things differently and have a dialogue, definitely.
So we have run out of time, but yeah. Victor, yes?
I just wanted to share, so I really resonate with the story that you shared, because my community in the United States faces those situations all of the time, right? We're watching people from our community, their lives being taken on video, etc. People with mental health issues. So I don't know exactly, I can't speak to the situation in Iceland, and I won't, and because it's, I'm not educated enough to make a suggestion on that. But what I will say is that we really, I think it goes beyond laws and beyond, yes, those are intricate parts of the problem, but what is happening systematically and why to those communities. So in the United States, we know why there's a war on drugs, we know why they're scheduled, we know why those things were established and structured in the way that they were structured, and what communities were targeted with that systematic structuring, right, of those issues. So I would say that I would recommend looking at the systemic issues here in Iceland with regard to those populations, and exploring where the changes need to happen at that systemic level and why they haven't yet. And then you'll find out who to talk to.
So I promised you that we must quit now. You have an important meeting with government officials in Iceland, and hopefully we have the courage here from our government and to be brave enough to take the next step, allowing maybe research here in Iceland and
compassionate use.
Yes, yeah. And so thank you for your insightful discussion and talks and thoughts on the matter. It's been delightful, and good luck on your journey. So thank you, and thank you for listening today. Thank you.